The African art market is a billion-dollar industry with its fair share of controversies. But did you know that in 2023, one French family actually sued their art dealer for undervaluing the mask they sold him? While they initially sold the mask for only 150 euros, it was resold soon after for 4.2 million euros, and the couple was not pleased when they found out. What was the historical significance of this mask, and what made it so rare and valuable? Let's put on our cowrie shells, tune our harps, and find out. Before we begin, a disclaimer. This video will mostly focus on Gabonese people, specifically the Fang ethnic group. If I talk about other ethnic groups, or if I talk about Fang people in other countries like Cameroon or Equatorial Guinea, I'll make sure to clarify. Also, I don't speak Fang, and since it's a tonal language with no consistent orthography, you should take my pronunciations with a grain of salt. With that, the Fang are a Bedi Pawan ethnic group that migrated into Gabon from the African interior sometime in the early 19th century. The exact geographic origin of the group, as well as the timeline of their migration, is up to historical debate. What we do know is that around the time the Fang first arrived in Gabon, they also made contact with white explorers and colonists. In turn, these explorers and colonists accused the Fang of cannibalism. See, the traditional Fang religion is one of ancestor worship. Ancestral relics, usually skull fragments, are kept in cylindrical boxes decorated with carved figurines called bieri. The omnipresence of human remains in Fang living spaces, combined with some good old-fashioned racism, caused many Europeans to believe that the Fang ate human flesh. These accounts of cannibalism were then widely published, and the myth of the African cannibal was cemented. Of course, these cannibalism claims don't hold up when scrutinized. For example, Albert L. Bennett, a British missionary, recalled, "In the autumn of 1898, a man was killed and eaten within 10 miles of our mission station on the Como River. I heard of the affair 2 days after the man had been killed. The people of the town would not admit eating a man, yet did not deny it. They said that the human bones in a hole behind the palaver house were those of a man who had died 2 days before." Like, great critical thinking, Dr. Bennett. No room for doubt here, that's for sure. But there were even worse accusers than Bennett. One of the most notorious was the anthropologist Paul Du Chaillu. Not only did he make cannibalism claims, but he actually stole many of the relics he encountered during his travels, the same ones that inspired the European belief in cannibalism. And while cannibalism among the Fang may not have been real, Du Chaillu's grave robbing certainly was. Besides ancestor worship, another element of Fang religion is masks. There are many diverse masks and headpieces traditionally made by the Fang, but I want to focus in particular on Ngontong, So, and Njil masks. The Ngontong, also called the Janus mask, is a type of helmet carved from a single block of wood. Paired with raffia costumes, Ngontong masks are worn as part of celebratory and festive dances. Because Ngontong masks fit over the entire head instead of just the face, there is room for them to have multiple faces, hence the name Janus mask. The masks are covered in kaolin clay to make them white. The white color not only represents ancestral spirits, but also the white skin of colonizers. Ngontong masks also sometimes have scarification patterns similar to those the Fang adorn themselves with. To create these patterns, artists burn the wood with hot iron. So masks were part of an elaborate coming-of-age ceremony that occurred periodically. The So ritual hazed male participants and allowed them to eat antelope meat. As such, So masks portray antelopes. The exact content of the rituals varied by region. They could involve scarification of the neck, eating revolting foods, being stung by fire ants, self-isolation, body paint, dancing, and the construction of temporary structures and sculptures. Although Fang tradition also had groups that were women only rather than men only like the So, the details of those have been largely lost to history. While the Ngontong and the So are certainly interesting, arguably the most interesting masks traditionally made by the Fang were those worn by the leader of the Njil. The Njil was a small group of male dignitaries that performed ceremonies to fight against witchcraft. Though I should clarify that when I say witchcraft, I have a somewhat specific definition. In Fang culture, people are categorized as having varying levels of magic within them. The first category of person has no magic. Any fortune or success that they happen to gain will be taken away by envious people, because any attempts to defend themselves by magical means will be ineffective. The second kind of person does have enough magic to protect themselves from envy. The third kind of person is a person who has magic in them and who uses it to steal or destroy others' wealth. This is witchcraft. Often, when someone died, it was believed that witchcraft was the cause. The leader of the Njil would therefore perform an autopsy to discover the cause of death. The leader was a sort of judge who had the responsibility to expose and punish witches. Besides witchcraft, the Njil also tried cases of murder, theft, assault, and interclan disputes. Occasionally, for the most severe crimes, death was the punishment. However, it should be noted that the Njil was largely preventative as a means of justice, planting the idea in people's heads that retribution would come to evildoers. The leader would punish sorcerers by casting magic spells, for example. He would also brandish ceremonial weapons. Even though the Njil was largely non-violent, contemporary historians claim the opposite. For example, missionary Henri Triel claimed that the leader would use his weapons to severely beat any child who cried during Injil rituals. He also claimed that one of the precursors to joining the Injil was to cannibalize a member of one's own family, while in reality, the Injil initiation was mostly about hazing, dancing, and performing rituals of sympathetic magic. The Injil's anti-witchcraft rituals took place at night, lit by torches. The leader would emerge in his mask and a raffia costume, flanked by the master of ceremonies and the other members of the group. The ceremony was accompanied by music played on mirlitons. Adding to the unique sound of the ceremony was the uncanny voice of the leader. Take a listen. How the Injil leader's inhuman voice was achieved is a bit of a mystery. Some outsiders used to believe the shape of the mask caused a reverb effect, but the more likely answer is that the leader would speak through a mirliton too. The shape of the Injil mask is so distinct though, it's no wonder it was theorized as having powerful properties. Injil masks are very long, sometimes over 80 centimeters. Other distinctive features are the heart-shaped face and domed forehead. Like the Ngontong, Injil masks are carved from wood, colored white with kaolin clay, and scarified. Although the scarification patterns may imply that the masks are meant to appear human like the Ngontong, they actually represent gorillas. Gorillas are associated with the power of fire, giving them spiritual significance to the Fong. In fact, when the word Injil is said in a low tone instead of a high tone, the meaning of the word changes to gorilla. Not just the Fong revere the power of gorillas. All over Africa, gorillas are believed to have magical properties, particularly the head and hands. As such, they are often poached for parts. Consumption of gorillas as food is rarer though. According to one study of Equatorial Guinea, taboos around gorilla meat mean that they are very rarely eaten by the Fong. Also, recent outreach and education programs about the impact of bushmeat have led to a reduction of its sale in Gabon. Poaching is still an issue, but there has at least been some progress made. While it's probably for the best that gorilla hunting is illegal, unfortunately, the Injil itself was illegal for a long time too, starting in the 1910s. I found a lot of sources claiming that Injil masks were outright banned by French colonists, but I couldn't verify that claim. I even reached out to multiple experts to ask if they knew anything about an explicit ban of Injil masks, and they couldn't confirm it either. However, in her paper Body, Power, and Sacrifice in Equatorial Africa, historian Florence Bernau does point out important changes in the laws of French Equatorial Africa. In 1910, a new court system was established, one which is overseen by the French. As such, natives were denied the right to fair trial, and Injil rituals were made extrajudicial. In 1923, under the guise of stopping cannibalism, desecration of a corpse was banned and ritual autopsies were then illegal too. So when people say the Injil was banned, it's not true, it's just an oversimplification of how persecution works. Colonists wished to legitimize French Equatorial Africa as a state, and so they imposed their own government and religion and declared all else illegal. It was a form of oppression which, as is often the case, was framed by the oppressors as constructive rather than destructive. Of course, ritualized witch hunting isn't a good thing, and I'm not here to defend it, but the French government basically replaced the religious and judicial systems that people consented to with ones they didn't consent to. Even with the colonial opposition to Central African cultures, masks continued to influence Europeans, who viewed them as art objects. Similar to how Yupik masks were exoticized as primitive, European artists mimicked African masks in their art while belittling their artistic value. Matisse and Picasso were both primitivists inspired by African art, as was the art dealer Ambroise Vollard, who had a Fong mask cast in bronze. The legacy of colonialism in Central Africa continued even further into the 20th century. For example, in interviews conducted in Equatorial Guinea, historian Enrique Okenve found that people considered the Injil foolishness in the 1950s, even though their fathers believed in it. It should also be noted that there were various religious movements in the 20th century wherein leaders sought to get rid of magical objects. One of the most notable of these leaders was Amana Bunker, a Congolese man who toured Fong-speaking areas to invoke the spirits Mademoiselle and Jean-Baptiste, who he depicted as distinctly European. Bunker identified sorcerers and convinced people to bury their relics in the ground, supposedly killing them by magic if they resisted. Like the Injil, this was a form of anti-witchcraft, but one in which witchcraft was defined as traditional medicine in general. Following Bunker's tour was a similar movement undertaken by Pascal Zwaka's Waka, who considered masks and reliquary figurines to be evil. Invoking Mademoiselle and Jean-Baptiste, he preached Christianity as an alternative to traditional African medicines. He also said that images from French fashion magazines would come to life and attack those who did not throw away their magical objects. Both Bunker and Zwaka claimed to have received their spiritual power from white men. For Bunker, it was a public works agent named Benoit in Cameroon, and for Zwaka, it was his boss Mario in Gabon. Despite traditional religion being persecuted, rites similar to the Injil have continued into the present. For example, in 2005, anthropologist Henning Christoph attended witch hunting rituals in Cameroon, where attendants adorned themselves with highly decorated gorilla skulls. These rites were performed by the Fong, spelled F-O-N-G, not F-A-N-G, another ethnic group under the Betty Powen umbrella. Their rituals may not have been exactly the same as those described in the history books, but the cultural practice of the Injil has still survived. And as anti-witchcraft rituals continue into the 21st century, so does witchcraft itself, which is sometimes attributed to a lack of Injil. Now, before I begin this section, let me be clear that this is a sensitive, nuanced topic. Antisocial behavior for the sake of traditional medicines is common in modern-day Gabon, and is often labeled as witchcraft. However, baseless rumors of witchcraft are also common. I don't want to thoughtlessly spread the idea that people are witches or that all traditional religious practices are inherently bad. I especially want to be careful because false accusations of witchcraft can and have led to violence, particularly against immigrants, people with albinism, and other marginalized groups. However, I also don't want to invalidate the suffering of people who have been victims of the behavior that is labeled as witchcraft. So keep all of that in mind for this next section. Rumors of witchcraft are common in Gabon. Some of these rumors are very easy to debunk, such as ones that claim that a handshake with an ill-intentioned stranger can make your genitals shrink. As one Gabonese woman put it, now even impotent men are going to claim their penis has been stolen. As silly as these rumors may seem, they can still lead to mob violence against the accused. They're powerful claims, as they play on deep-seated fears of the loss of bodily autonomy. This loss of autonomy is the same reason that stories of Paul du Chaillu's grave robbing are so awful to us. Speaking of which, the witchcraft rumors that tend to be more truthful are rumors of grave robbing. Grave robbing is very common in Gabon. However, instead of being stolen by unscrupulous scientists, bones are stolen by people who sell them for use in traditional medicine, usually at high prices. This is easier to verify through means such as photographic evidence of disturbed graves. Organ harvesting is another form of witchcraft in Gabon, the claim usually being that murderers are stealing people's organs to sell for their magical properties. To reiterate, I don't want to dismiss the grief and pain felt by the victims of this violence. I just want to add that unfortunately, unfounded rumors of such violence are also common, and it's therefore difficult to separate fact from fiction. Often, witchcraft accusations even come from sources such as L'Union, Gabon's state newspaper, meaning there's a lot of potential for political bias. It's no surprise that the state newspaper mentions witchcraft though, considering discussions of witchcraft and accusations of ritual crimes are common in Gabonese politics. I would argue that there are three main reasons for this. A, because conspiracy theories about government higher-ups being involved in secret violent rituals are common everywhere in the world. B, because human bones and organs aren't cheap, and so the people who are even capable of committing ritual crimes have to be members of the elite. And C, because politicians encourage these rumors. In a nation where belief in magic is common, accusing someone else of ritual crimes or claiming that you're backed by powerful forces are good political strategies. If anything, I'm curious to see what happens to rumors of witchcraft now that Gabon has had a major leadership change. As of this video, it's only been 2 years since President Bongo was deposed via coup d'etat. Will this upheaval in government change how witchcraft is portrayed in Gabonese media? I don't know, because I dropped out of journalism school, but it's something to wonder about. So, now that we have a little more context, we can go back and look at our questions from the beginning of the episode. What was the significance of the mask in the French lawsuit? It was an Injil mask, meaning it has an important place in history, especially since it was collected by colonial administrator René Victor Fournier. Why was it so rare and valuable? Because the suppression of the Injil meant that Injil masks were made far less often than they might have been otherwise. In the end, the lawsuit failed, but the lawsuit was not the mask's only legal troubles. The Gabonese government had actually asked for court proceedings to be suspended so they could file a case claiming that the mask was stolen. The original auction also attracted protests calling for repatriation. Despite all of this, the efforts to have the mask returned failed. In cases such as these, a lack of clear provenance means that it's difficult to tell if the mask was stolen in a strictly legal sense, even if it's clear that the means of acquiring it were not morally sound because of their basis in colonialism. Artifacts like the Injil, despite their cultural importance, are unlikely to come home. Is there anything I forgot to discuss on this topic? Which mask featured in this video is your favorite? Let me know in the comments. This episode's charity shoutout is the Pan-African Sanctuary Alliance, a uniting force to protect Africa's primates, empower local communities, and preserve habitats. The PASA supports various wildlife sanctuaries across Africa, including in Gabon. The work not only helps care for gorillas, but supports communities in order to reduce the need for illegal bushmeat hunting. A link to donate is in the description.